It started with a shout, a fighter pilot in full gear, screaming in the middle of the airbase runway, not at a soldier, not at another officer, but at a 19-year-old girl in mechanic's overalls, gloves still covered in grease, standing her ground, while he pointed in her face like she'd broken the plane on purpose. He humiliated her in front of everyone, called her just the mechanic's daughter, but what he didn't know was what she'd found inside that engine. And when she finally spoke up, what she said would flip the entire base on its head. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Everyone on base knew who Captain Reed Mallory was. 2 tours overseas, 3 commendations, and a temper that could cut steel. He flew like a ghost in the sky, cold and precise. On the ground, though, Reed had no patience for mistakes, or for people he thought didn't belong. He didn't know much about Sofia Morales. She was new, technically just a trainee, working under her father's old clearance. Quiet, serious, always at the hangar by sunrise. Most people thought she was just filling time. They didn't know she'd practically grown up in that hangar, tucked under wings and turbines before she could even walk straight. Her father, Brian Morales, had been the chief mechanic here for 25 years, until the fall that ended his career. Since then, she'd taken over his place one bolt at a time. Not officially, not on paper, but anyone who paid attention could see she knew those jets better than half the team combined. Still, being the daughter of a legend didn't count for much when you were 19, short and female, in a world built by men in uniforms. Sofia kept her head down. She never corrected anyone when they got her name wrong, never snapped back when they questioned her diagnostics. She just kept working. That was her revenge, doing things right, over and over, while no one looked. The base was running routine simulations that week. Old jets were getting pushed harder than usual, and the team was stretched thin. Reed's F-16 had been acting up. Inconsistent engine readings, brief power surges, unexplained system resets mid-flight. Maintenance had cleared it twice, but he wasn't buying it. After his 3rd forced landing in 2 days, he stormed into the hangar, still in his flight suit, yelling before he even crossed the line. "Who signed off on 612? He barked. "You trying to get someone killed out there?" The team froze. Sofia looked up from the diagnostics panel. Her supervisor looked down, didn't answer. That silence, it's what pushed her to speak. "Sir," she said carefully, "I think the bypass valve on the secondary fuel intake is sticking. It could explain the fluctuation mid-flight." Reed turned, squinted like he hadn't even noticed her standing there. "You think?" She nodded. "It happened once before, in July. Same serial range. I logged it." Reed laughed, sharp and cold. "That engine was cleared by 2 senior techs. You trying to teach the Air Force how engines work now?" "No, sir, just offering what I found." He stared at her for a second too long, then smirked. "All right, genius. Since you got it all figured out, you fix it. Tonight yourself. And if it doesn't pass inspection by 0700, you're off the team. That clear enough for you, Morales?" You could feel the whole hangar stop breathing. She didn't flinch. "Clear, sir." He walked off without another word. That night, she stayed. Everyone else left by 11. Her father came by around midnight, rolled in silently in his wheelchair, parked near the nose of the jet, didn't say much, just watched her work like he used to. Sofia had her laptop open, old schematics pulled up, 2 decades of mechanical notes her dad had saved, printed, scribbled on by hand. She worked in silence, pulling apart the intake casing, cleaning the valve chamber, replacing parts that were never meant to be swapped outside of a factory. Her fingers bled from the threads. Her eyes stung from lack of sleep, but she didn't stop. She was tired of being called a lucky guess, tired of people thinking she was there out of pity or legacy or worse, because no one else wanted the job. Around 3 in the morning, the new valve sat clean and realigned. She ran diagnostics, twice. Numbers held. Pressure was steady. It was working, but even then she didn't relax. She sat next to the wheelbase, eating from a vending machine bag of chips, just staring at the jet, waiting for the sun. By 0700, Reed was there. Of course he was, leaning against the truck, gloves already on, watching her like a vulture. She didn't say a word, just handed him the clipboard and stepped back. The ignition test was clean, pressure stable, systems held under stress. One of the senior engineers gave a subtle nod. Reed looked over the readout, then back at her. "You do this alone?" "Yes, sir." He narrowed his eyes. "Where'd you even get the clearance to pull the intake?" "I logged the override under Emergency Repair Protocol, Rule 5C. He couldn't argue with that, not in front of the team. He just stared, jaw clenched, then muttered, "Next time, wait for orders." She didn't nod, didn't smile, just picked up her gloves and walked back to her station. After that day, things started shifting, some for the better, some worse. Word got around fast. The kid fixed 612. Some of the younger techs started asking her questions, curious. The older ones didn't like it, said she was lucky, that the problem was minor, that she got help and just didn't admit it. Reed didn't say anything, but he started showing up more, watching her work, hovering during inspections, assigning her to more and more complex repairs, things that had been shelved for weeks. She kept taking them, one after another, fixing each one without complaint, but the line was thin. One mistake, and she knew they'd be on her like wolves. Her dad warned her, said the Air Force isn't a place that forgets when you show someone up, even if they're wrong, especially if they're wrong. But Sophia wasn't interested in playing politics. She didn't want to make a name. She just wanted to prove to herself, to her dad, to every single person who looked at her like a tag-along kid, that she belonged there, that her hands, her brain, her instincts were just as sharp as any badge or title. That was the beginning, the moment everything started to change. Not because of what she fixed, but because of what she didn't yet know, about the jet, about the man who challenged her, and about a secret buried deep in the base's old records, waiting to be uncovered. By the following week, Sophia had become a name people either whispered with admiration or dismissed with bitterness. Her fix on 612 had held, not just held, it had improved performance. Diagnostics showed engine stability up by 7%, a number that made the command team nod and scribble quietly in their reports. But none of that changed the way people looked at her. Some started including her in morning check-ins, asking for her notes during calibrations. Others avoided eye contact entirely, like acknowledging her meant agreeing with her. That's the strange part about proving people wrong. They either pull you closer or push you further away. Her father had mixed feelings. He was proud, of course, proud in that silent way dads get when they watch their kids step up in ways they can't anymore. But he also knew how things worked on base. Reputation didn't shift easily, especially for someone without rank, without a badge, without a place in the command tree. Sophia didn't even have her own locker. She worked out of a toolbox with her name taped to it in fading permanent marker. There were rules, spoken and unspoken, and one of them was this: when you start standing out, someone will try to knock you down, not because you did something wrong, but because you made them feel something they didn't want to feel. Inadequate, exposed, unnecessary. Reed didn't speak to her for 3 days after the test. He just watched. Every time she crossed the tarmac, she could feel his eyes on her. When she worked under a jet, tightening valves or checking pressure seals, he was there during inspections, saying nothing, just marking notes on a clipboard. When she handed in diagnostics, he looked at them longer than he needed to, as if searching for flaws. But the silence didn't make her nervous. What made her nervous was that she couldn't tell what he was waiting for. Then, during a Monday briefing, he finally addressed her, in front of the team. "Morales," he said flatly, "you're on primary rotation for 404. Diagnostic run, pre-flight and mechanical clearance. Get it done by Thursday." 404 wasn't just another aircraft. It was one of the oldest on base, a stubborn Frankenstein of a jet that had been stripped and rebuilt more times than anyone could count. Everyone hated working on it. Systems were outdated, wiring didn't match newer modules, and every time it flew, it brought back 5 new problems. Sophia didn't blink. She just nodded and wrote it down. What followed were 3 days of non-stop grinding. Literally. The left turbine mount had hairline cracks, the central panel was misaligned, and 2 of the fuel sensors were delivering false readings under altitude pressure. Sophia took it all apart, section by section. Sometimes she worked alone, sometimes with support from the quieter techs who started to respect her. Reed showed up during one of the recalibrations. He stood off to the side with crossed arms, watching her explain the issue to a senior mechanic. She didn't look at him, just kept talking, but she could feel it, that edge in the air when someone is daring you to screw up. It was Lieutenant Dane who first broke the tension in a way that actually mattered. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He just started treating her like she belonged, asked her for input, gave her flight logs to cross-reference engine behavior, said thank you when she handed him reports. It was small, but it counted. Respect is rarely a loud thing. It shows up in who listens, who shares space, who stops calling you by the wrong name on purpose. Still, the pushback grew. One afternoon, she went to her station and found her tools scattered on the ground. No one said a word. The cameras in that part of the hangar hadn't been working for weeks. She didn't report it, just picked everything up, cleaned it, and got back to work. But that night, at home, she sat in the garage with her dad, cleaning her wrenches in silence. He looked at her for a long time before saying, "You don't have to win every fight just to prove you belong." "I'm not trying to win," she said. "I just want the engine to run right." "That's not what they see." She didn't answer, didn't want to admit how tired she was, or how much it hurt to still feel like an outsider, no matter how hard she worked. By Thursday, 404 was ready. Pre-flight ran clean. Systems held under simulation. Reed signed off, barely looking at her. No words, just a cold scribble on the form. But that night, something happened that no one expected. A visiting general from another base had come to observe exercises. Midway through a scheduled flyover, his jet, one of the newer models, began losing altitude. Fast. Radio crackled. Systems were failing. For a terrifying moment, it looked like he might have to eject over open farmland, but he didn't crash. Because Sophia, 2 days earlier, had flagged an anomaly in the auxiliary circuit board used in that aircraft class. She'd logged the report, filed it, and rerouted the cooling flow to stabilize the power loop, a preventative measure that no one had asked her to take. That change saved the jet, and maybe the general's life. After landing, there was chaos, briefings, applause, reports. Her name came up again and again. This time, it wasn't just inside the hangar. Word spread across the base. Even the general asked to meet her, called her a rising mind, and told the command team to keep an eye on that one. It should have been a moment of pure validation, but that's not how it worked. The very next day, someone broke the lock on her toolbox. Tools were missing. Someone had written, "Stay in your lane," on the underside of the top drawer. She said nothing, reported nothing. But when she looked up, she saw Reed across the hangar, watching her again. Not with anger this time, but something more unreadable. Calculation, maybe, or fear. The recognition from the general brought something else too. More responsibility. The commander started assigning her to more advanced diagnostics. Sophia kept showing up early, staying late, solving problems that no one else wanted to touch. Reed started being less subtle. He grilled her in meetings, demanded detailed breakdowns of systems she'd already explained, asked why to everything she said, like a professor trying to catch a student cheating on a test. She didn't react. She answered every question, calm, firm, clear. But behind that calm was exhaustion. The pressure wasn't just technical, it was emotional, a constant humming reminder that every step she took forward was another reason for someone to push her back. Lieutenant Dane started walking with her between hangars, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to listen. He told her she was doing the right thing, that the base needed people like her, people who didn't quit, didn't look the other way. She appreciated it. She liked him. He didn't talk down to her or treat her like a symbol. He just treated her like a person who was doing good work. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Friday afternoon, conference room. Reed announced that 107, the oldest and most unstable aircraft on base, basically a museum piece with wings, would undergo full re-evaluation and prep for demo flight. He said he was personally overseeing it. Then turned to Sophia. "You'll lead diagnostics." The room went quiet. Everyone knew that plane was a nightmare. No one had flown it in 5 years. The last time they tried to power it up, the system shorted and nearly started a fire. Sophia said yes anyway. 48 hours. Reed said. Full clearance, no assistance. She nodded. No one smiled. By the time she walked back into the hangar, the sky was already darkening. The old jet stood there, worn, rusted in places, parts of its shell showing layers of forgotten paint jobs. But she didn't see a relic. She saw a system. Old, yes, but full of patterns. If something had failed, something had left a trace. She started with the logs, decades of maintenance notes, half digital, half scanned from old paper. She didn't sleep that night. She wanted to understand everything, not just what was broken, but who had worked on it, when, and why. And that's when she noticed something strange, a series of overrides logged under a different system tag. Manual reroutes of engine behavior, experimental modifications, signed off under a pilot ID she didn't recognize at first, but the more she read, the colder she felt, because she realized that someone had knowingly flown that aircraft in a dangerously unstable configuration, and the name on the override, R. Mallory. Sophia didn't sleep that night, not just because of the jet's condition, or the impossible deadline, or the pressure now built into every second she spent at the base, but because of what she'd found in the records. She reread the override logs over and over, trying to make sense of them, trying to believe maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But the data was there, plain and undeniable. A pilot had approved a configuration that bypassed multiple safety protocols on Jet 107, not once, but twice. Both times, the aircraft had flown under stress it wasn't built for, and both times it had come back shaking and barely operational. The signature on those entries wasn't some ghost from years ago. It was him, R. Mallory, Reed, back when he was still rising through the ranks, long before he earned his reputation for control and precision, before the medals and the authority. She sat alone in the small supply room, staring at the printed documents in her lap, feeling the weight of the truth. It explained things. The paranoia, the hostility, the calculated way he'd cornered her into impossible repairs. He wasn't just trying to test her, he was trying to keep her from getting close to something. And she had, without even knowing it, by doing her job better than anyone expected, by following protocols others ignored. She'd walked straight into a secret he'd buried deep in the belly of that jet. The next morning, she arrived before dawn. The hangar was still locked. She rolled open the gate herself, walked in with her duffel, and went straight to the jet. She didn't say anything to the techs who arrived an hour later, didn't mention what she'd discovered. She just worked, silently, methodically, stripping down components, scanning modules, checking every inch of the aircraft until the pieces began to fit together. It wasn't just a mistake. Reed had customized that override to compensate for a misaligned engine swap, a prototype installation that had never been cleared officially. He'd flown it during a high-stakes demonstration years ago, risking the entire platform just to prove something, maybe to impress someone, maybe to jump ahead. Whatever the reason, the mod had been dangerous, and the fact that he'd covered it instead of reporting it made it worse. If the configuration had failed mid-flight, it could have killed him, or someone else. By noon, Sophia had run the final simulations and completed the necessary corrections. The engine was stable, the cooling system rebalanced, and the old aircraft, for the first time in a decade, was functional. It could fly, but that wasn't the point anymore. She packed her bag, folded the printed logs carefully, and walked to the command office. She didn't ask to see Reed. She asked to speak to the base commander directly. The assistant hesitated, surprised, but called upstairs. Within 10 minutes, she was in a room with 3 senior officers, her hands holding the evidence, her voice steady as she explained the override logs and the configuration errors. She didn't accuse, she didn't speculate. She just presented facts, signed records, dated entries, and a working knowledge of what those changes meant for the safety of the aircraft. When she was done, she placed the papers on the table and said, "I fixed the jet, but someone else broke it years ago. I don't think that should be ignored." They didn't say much, just looked at each other and dismissed her gently. She didn't expect anything more in that moment. She left the office the same way she walked in, calm, with her head high, her steps firm. Later that afternoon, the air on base shifted. Reed didn't show up for the final inspection. Word spread quickly. He'd been called into a private meeting, then another. Then his name was removed from the afternoon briefing. No one said why, No one needed to. The hangar was quieter than usual. Some people avoided her. Others looked at her differently. Not with pity or admiration, but something more complicated, as if they were finally seeing her not just as the mechanic's kid, but as someone who'd done something that mattered. Something they weren't sure they would have had the courage to do themselves. By evening, Reed's office was cleared, a few personal items boxed up. No confrontation, no last speech. He left the base the next morning in a black car, windows rolled up. Sophia saw him go from the corner of the hangar. He didn't look back, neither did she. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically become perfect. She still had to prove herself. There were still people who didn't like her, who thought she'd stepped out of line, but there was something new now. Space. She was invited to briefings, given official recognition for her work on Jet 107, and then, one morning, she was handed a new badge. Engineering Development Trainee, a title, finally. One that belonged to her, not borrowed from her father's legacy. Brian Morales didn't say much when she told him, just nodded slowly, eyes wet, and said, "You earned it, all of it." Lieutenant Dane kept showing up around the hangar, not just for work, sometimes to talk, sometimes to walk with her after shifts. He never brought up what happened with Reed. He didn't have to. She knew he understood the cost of doing the right thing, even when no one asked you to. One afternoon, she stood by Jet 612 again, the first jet she'd ever fixed on her own, the one that started it all. She ran her hand along the panel, still slightly scuffed where the casing didn't quite match. It wasn't perfect, but it flew, and that was enough. Some people go their whole lives without being seen. Others are seen too early for the wrong reasons. Sophia had been both. She'd spent years learning in silence, building piece by piece, until the silence cracked under the weight of truth. What happened on that base wasn't just about a broken engine, or a reckless override, or a disgraced pilot. It was about trust, about how fragile and valuable it is, about what happens when people build careers on fear, and what happens when someone refuses to play by those rules. Sophia didn't want applause. She never had. She just wanted to know she did it right, that she followed the numbers, that she didn't back down when it counted. And now, with her own path just beginning, she finally felt like she belonged, not because someone gave her permission, but because she made a place no one could take from her. If this story meant something to you, type the word courage in the comments. Because sometimes courage isn't loud, it's fixing what others broke, even when no one is watching. There is a story here on the screen that will also move you. Press to watch. You won't regret it.